Joining me now to talk more about this, CNN counterterrorism analyst Phil Mudd, former deputy director of the CIA's Counterterrorism Center. Phil, thanks so much for being here. You used to work at the CIA. Yep. Should the public be more concerned about our enemies waging a cyber war and hacking into the power grid or dams than they are concerned, for instance, about a terrorist attack like the one we saw in San Bernardino?
I think the concern should grow over time. Look, if you're looking at conventional warfare, a war against threats like North Korea or Iran, what we're seeing is these countries collecting information that could be used in unprecedented ways that we haven't seen in war in the past. Dams, chemical facilities, trains. So I think if you're looking at what happens down the road and how war will be waged in the decades to come, you've got to look at this and take a leap in imagination, understand what does the world of the future look like when you don't have to actually have a physical presence to damage the infrastructure of a country like America.
You had the Juniper Network hack last week. According to a study released by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, the U.S. could suffer a major blackout for weeks, if not months, if hackers were able to take out just 9 of the 55,000 substations across the country, just 9 of them. Has the government and the private sector, have they been doing enough to take care of this problem?
I think they're working on it. The big problem you see here is a transformation in the U.S. security apparatus. That is, if you think about where we were 20 years ago, the government owned everything in terms of national security. If you wanted to understand the Soviet Union or China, intercepted communications, overhead imagery, the satellites, for example, spies in the Soviet Union, that was the information you used. Today, the information to protect this country resides not in government, but in companies, in infrastructure. So I think the government is trying to understand, how do we get some balance between compelling the private sector to cooperate and asking them to give us information that helps us secure the country better? I don't think we have a handle on this yet.
And private sector obviously does not frequently want to share information because they don't want their customers to be alarmed. Tell me what you think about this hack of a dam. Why do that if it's such a relatively unimportant dam? Is it just a dry run, you think?
I don't think it's unimportant. I think what you're looking at is the difference between collection and use. That is, if you're a security service, you're collecting information that you might be able to use in the event of a conflict. Dams, what's happening in major cities, for example, electrical grids, it's not that they intend to attack one single dam. They're trying to understand the capabilities they can employ in the event of a conflict. So you got to separate out what they're collecting now and how it might be used down the road.
This is an alarming statistic. According to the Wall Street Journal, 295 industrial control system hacking incidents were reported from September 2014 to September 2015. That's up from 245 the year before. The number of successful hacks keeps going up. What security improvements can be taken to prevent these attacks?
There's got to be a conversation between the private sector and the government. The Congress has got to get involved. It's the same conversation you have on what's called going dark, that is encryption that's allowing terrorists to communicate without the government intercepting them. You don't want to force the private sector to cooperate because, as you said, as soon as the government forces the private sector loses a competitive advantage. A Chinese company says, come with us.
Right.
We're not going to give your information over. At the same time, you can't allow this to continue without some conversation among the private sector about what are they experiencing. Let's share our experiences without revealing what's happened to us. So I think there's got to be some sophisticated conversation enabled by the government to allow sharing of information across the private sector without revealing a lot of detail.
How much is the U.S. government doing this as well? For instance, we know about the Stuxnet worm that the U.S. Working with the Israelis did to sabotage the Iranian nuclear program. Is the U.S. doing this too, and the U.S. government is just not acknowledging it?
Heck yeah, but you got to differentiate a few things. If you're collecting information that could be used in the event of a conflict, how does an electrical grid work? So if you're involved in a conflict in a major city, you want to take that out. There is a huge differentiation, though, in the U.S. government that other countries don't necessarily use, and that is, if you're collecting information for national security purposes, people like me, my generation, would say that's appropriate, and it's appropriate in the cyber world. If you're collecting it for commercial purposes, to allow better competition against the Chinese version of Apple or the Iranian version of General Motors, that would be viewed as not legitimate. National security, okay. Economic advantage, not okay.
All right, Phil Mudd, thank you so much.